That's kind of nice. Another way of put it is how to get wisdom and stop ignorance. That sounds a bit abstract, but actually that's the method to get happy, which is curious, and we'll look at that. And also because we're on this world together, a bird has two wings: wisdom, which is this first bit, put yourself together, lessen your own neuroses and grow your goodness, get your own happiness and quit your own suffering. And then when we start to realize we're all in the same boat, on this crazy planet, then we begin to want to help others as well. Bird needs two wings: wisdom and compassion. And as Holiness says often, compassion is the point, but it's not enough. You need wisdom. So tonight's topic is the wisdom side, how to put ourselves together, you know. So why are we doing this? So we can take some tools from it. And I always say, even if it's 1% that makes any sense to you, then go for it, take it, put it into practice, you know, try it. So that's why we're here together, so we can develop our own marvelous potential, so we can help others. So I always like to quote His Holiness. He said it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. Well, we arrogant kind of Eurocentric people probably thought it was Freud 100 years ago. So now we're starting to realize this, I think, that this extraordinary body of knowledge coming out of India. And then His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, the Buddha, of course, was educated in that system, went as far as he could go, and then he went further, directly in relation to his own, and then he diverged, specifically in relation to his own experiential findings about the nature of self, the nature of the universe, the nature of things. That's his expertise. So what realizes that, what develops that expertise is the mind. So you could say that, you know, Buddha is, and I'm really not being sarcastic or silly, he is like your best therapist in the universe. He's your best, actually he's a cognitive therapist. You know, you get to become familiar with your thoughts. Thoughts are not set in stone. You change your thoughts. And he says, as far as he's concerned, we can absolutely eradicate all the neurotic thoughts, the misconceptions, the destructive emotions, and we can fully develop the goodness. That's essentially, in fact, that's the etymology of the word Buddha, or Sangye in Tibetan, I think, which seems incredibly simple. This is really what Buddha's about. So, okay, in order then to, so why? Okay, so if the mind is the source of everything, Buddha's saying is the source of everything, what goes on in the mind is the source of happiness and the source of suffering. So we look at the Four Noble Truths, the second one tells us the main causes of suffering. And flip it over, of course, the main causes of happiness. The key one, there are two, one says karma, the other one says the mind, and they subsume to the one, mind. So this is really Buddha's expertise, and that might often be a surprise in the world. We often think Buddhism is all about meditation, which we think is a bit mystical, mindfulness, kind of walking slowly or something. I don't quite know what, but it's a bit more than that. You know, and this is the information that came from the Indians. I mean, any of us, if we've studied a little bit about the mind, studied this text that's based in the monastic university system in Tibet that comes from the Nalanda monastery, as His Holiness likes to tell us, we are the Nalanda tradition. You know, this text called Lorig, Mind and Awareness, I think. This is, you know, and then extensive literature in the Buddhist worldview over the centuries about the mind and how it functions. It's actually incredibly fascinating and incredibly precise. In the same way that neuroscience is precise. I think psychology in the world is a bit low on the totem pole. It seems a bit vague, you know. But neuroscience is because it's hard and precise. Well, that same clarity, you know, that same precision is what is demanded of the Buddhist approach to know your own mind. So if our happiness and the eradication of our suffering and the development of our happiness come from our mind, we had better know what he means by it precisely, not have a vague notion. So it's crucial to understand this. Initially, we can't, of course, prove it, but you have to take it as your hypothesis, like any decent scientist would. So the first thing to remember is that the word mind and the word consciousness are used virtually synonymously in Buddhism. Different context, but essentially the same. Second, absolutely fundamental, is that it's not physical. It is not your brain. It is not even a function of your brain. So if you are a neuroscientist, I'll try to insult you, you know, but without insulting you, I would say the best way to say what the brain, as far as what the brain is a physical indicator of what's going on in the mind. Because for the Buddha, this word mind refers not to this physical component, but to this subjective cognitive process itself, you know. And this is the expertise of these genius Indians. They're the ones who created that technique called shamatha, single point of concentration. this level of concentration, samadhi, which is the third point, the second point about the mind, the third point that's not physical, and that it's got these far subtler levels of cognition that the brain is not involved in. So the brain is the physical indicator of what's going on in the mind, only at the grosser level, the sensory and the grosser conceptual level, perhaps. So the mind is not physical. And the other thing, of course, is that this is quite a shock to us. If you're a philosophical materialist, as far as you're concerned, mummy and daddy made you. They're your creators. They gave you a brain and the genes and the DNA. And that means they also gave you happiness and suffering, which is why we all have to blame them. Well, mostly mummies get the blame, don't they? You don't read books about how daddies are the cause of all our suffering. It's the mothers, So we are very clear. It's very clear that yes, they did give you a brain, but from the Buddhist perspective, they did not give you your mind. And this is something we need to hypothesize really clearly, because it's the absolute basis of Buddhist practice. The view that your mind is yours. And the other thing is, it does not come from a creator. I mean, there are the two options in the world. Your mummy created you or God created you, isn't it? Well, we don't need creating. Buddha says we do fine creating our own happiness, and we do fine creating our own mess. Because from the Buddhist perspective, mind it didn't start in the womb. In fact, it doesn't have a beginning, which is the biggest shock on the planet, because one of the main questions we have is, when did it begin? Well, it's a product of the law of cause and effect, and we can spend the next 2 hours on that. It's a product of the law of cause and effect, and if you posit cause and effect, by definition, you cannot have a thing called a first cause. I mean, I was a Catholic, and I know the Catholics, and I love my Catholic upbringing, but the Catholics have a lot of philosophical discussion about how there can be a first cause, capital F, capital C, which of course is God. It's not viable for the Buddha. It's just not viable, And this is what's in the literature, these incredible discussions about exactly how it can be this and can't be that. So Buddha does not posit a creator because we don't, not because we don't need one, because there isn't such a thing. He says it's a misconception. He agrees with the Christian idea, certainly the Catholic one, that God, there's this energy called God that has these 3 essential qualities: infinite wisdom, infinite compassion, infinite power. I gave a talk at the Catholic University in Melbourne, where I was brought up in Australia, and a 20-minute talk. And on the morning I arrived, I didn't know what I was going to talk about, but I looked in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and I looked at the definition of God, these 3 essential qualities, and I thought, oh, wow, that's the same as the Buddha. So my talk was for the people, whether they liked it, I don't know, the similarities between the definition of God and Buddha. But of course, the major difference with the Buddha, consciousness can be perfected, but everybody's can. Everyone, it's not just one, it's not just a superior being called God. Not like that. Every being has the potential to become a superior being once you realize emptiness, and then you perfect your mind, ridding it of a rubbish, pervading, and then developing the perfection. Everybody has that potential. So he doesn't posit the idea of a creator. There's nothing like that in Buddhism. Don't need one. Which is a bit shocking if you think it's religion, because we assume religion equals creator. So you're not made by your mummy and daddy. Your mind is not your brain. It is not physical. It doesn't come from someone else. That's the key point. In both of those philosophies, it comes from someone else. Well, Buddha is not rude. He's very polite, but it's the wackiest idea in Buddhism. The weirdest idea that someone can give you anger, give you love, give you compassion, give you being good at tennis, give you psychosis. No way. And this is the essence of the Buddhist approach. This is background now for our discussion. That this mind of ours is a beginningless continuity of mental moments. So if you can track it back perfectly to the first second of conception, the egg will go back to mummy's body, sperm will go back to daddy's body. Well, where does your mind go back to? To a previous moment of that continuity of mental moments. And a few weeks before that, it was in a previous body, and so on and so forth. So if the thing is, this is fundamental to all the Buddhist view. And if we can disprove this, we can prove Buddha's, wrong, the whole of Buddhism collapses into a heap of absurdity, incoherent nonsense. So this is the view of the mind. So the main point of this, of course, is the experiential implication of it. That that our mind programmed, this is the law of karma, every millisecond what we think and do and say programs us basically into the person we become. It's not a complicated idea. You do that when you play music, you create the musician. If you're good at cooking, you create the cook. But when it comes to happiness and suffering, we think everybody else creates it. But the Buddha is agreeing that we create that as well. So whatever you put in your mind produces the person you become, which is hardly a difficult concept. That's the concept of karma. So what comes from this view, taking it as your hypothesis as a Buddhist practitioner, is an incredible sense of responsibility, of accountability, which completely opposes the victim mentality, which is the view of ego. I'm an innocent victim. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. And the world does things to me. You know, that's the feeling we have. It's a feeling we have. That's the feeling of ego. So as we progress, developing this view that my mind is mine, I brought it with me, what's in it is mine, I put it there. We also then develop the confidence that I can change it because it's not set in stone. This is fundamental to the Buddhist view. So it's not physical. Doesn't come from mummy or daddy. It's got much subtler levels of cognition that we can access using shamatha, this brilliant technique invented by the Indians. It's a continuity of mental moments, and it's driven by the law of karma. So this is the essence of the Buddhist approach, and the implication of this practically, experientially, is practice. So, okay, so now you've got the actual discussion about the mind, the psychological model of the mind. You've got the epistemological, the way it works, which is utterly brilliant. I mean, scientists will be so fascinated to study the epistemological model of the mind in Buddhism, but they've got to first posit the possibility that they're not discussing the brain. Because it's totally fascinating, utterly, how it works. It's amazing. Now, then there's a psychological model, and that's our discussion here. So as far as Buddha is concerned, quite simply, it's almost deceptively simple. We can divide all the contents of our mind, and there are countless thoughts, feelings, emotions, so on and so forth. We know that. They all fit into 3 categories. This is kind of brilliant, you know. There are those that are neurotic, necessarily neurotic, I-based, fear-based, miserable, unhappy, restricted, constricted. The word they use the one word they tend to use, both the Sanskrit and the Tibetan, is the word affliction, which we don't tend to use in daily life. It's a bit arcane, isn't it? But you know, they have two main functions. One is they are in their nature disturbing. Check the last time you're anxious or jealous or depressed. You don't say, oh wow, I was jealous yesterday, it was just great. We know they are totally painful. And then the other thing is the way they function, which is more subtle, which is the crucial piece. And from that perspective, they're called delusions. And so in English, it's a great word. I see in Italian and Spanish and French, there's not a really kind of good word for it, so there's kind of a bit weird way they translate, in my opinion. But this word in English is perfect. You know very well if someone's accusing you of being delusional, they're telling you that you're not in touch with reality. And that is bullseye. This is precisely what Buddha's telling us. We only really hear this when we start to realize, when we start to listen to the teachings about emptiness and the subtle and the most primordial delusion of ego grasping that has the misconception, the delusion that I'm a solid, concrete, inherent little person, you know. But all the delusions, the branch delusions, and these are the branch delusions, and the root delusion have this particular function. When we can see this, we are really on track with being Buddhist, you know. So, okay, the second category of states of mind. So this first lot, this is what Buddha has found, as outrageous as it is. It's so shocking, actually radical concept, that these are not at the core of our being. These are not intrinsic to us. They therefore can be removed. So the entire job of being a Buddhist, and why you need to get single point of concentration, is so that you can do the work of unpacking and unraveling and deconstructing and eventually ridding utterly from the mind these absurd neurotic misconceptions. That's why we need shamatha, you know. This is so shocking because as far as we're concerned in our culture, both neuroscience and psychology, there's an absolute given that a normal person has some attachment, some anger, some jealousy, some arrogance, and these are all in the first category. They're normal parts of a normal person. And we mean by normal that you'd be weird if you didn't have them. But this is Buddha's view. It's so radical, so shocking. He says they're not at the core of our being. We can remove them. So it's almost laughable because it's sort of like you've got to cut pieces of yourself out. And certainly if you think it's the brain, I mean, we'll say, well, excuse me, we tried back in the 30s. It was called lobotomies, you know, just turn people into veggies. It didn't work. So it's quite shocking to hear this concept. But this is the basis of all Buddhist teachings. That's what he means by achieving nirvana, cessation of suffering. You know, that's the accomplishment of the wisdom wing. Then the second category, these are our saving grace. These are actually our human qualities. And guess what? They're called love, compassion, kindness, generosity, forgiveness. We know these states of mind. And we know at the simplest level, the second lot are nice and the first lot aren't. It's not being moralistic, it's not being guilty, we just know it experientially. These are our saving grace. So the first lot we can rid the mind of, the second lot we can develop to perfection. That's Buddha, okay? Now the third lot, this is until we really get used to this idea, taking this model about states of mind being non-virtuous or broadly negative. That seems a bit moralistic to us. We don't like the sound of it. In psychology, we don't like saying it's negative. It seems like you're criticizing a person. So we've really got to get the idea what Buddha means by that. He means they cause suffering. It's not judgmental. There's no judge in Buddhism. There's no rewarder. There's no punisher. There's no boss. So when we get the idea of this and the understanding of what a negative or neurotic, you would have liked that word, or these non-virtuous states of mind. Negative and non-virtuous aren't always synonymous. We can sort of use them broadly here, synonymous. They're the source of our pain. And the Buddha's whole approach is, listen, sweetie pies, these are why you suffer. But we hear it as judgmental. We hear it as somebody beating us, and you're not allowed to be this way, you're naughty, because that's how we hear about religion. We can't help but hear that. So it really needs this constant reminder. There's nothing to do with punishment and reward. There's no punisher and there's no rewarder in Buddhism. We do it to ourselves. My Catholic mother used to say, virtue has its own rewards. That's the point. So the second lot, the positive ones, the virtuous ones. Now the third lot, in reference to the first lot being negative and positive, or virtuous and non-virtuous, the third lot are called neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. So this is an odd concept until we get these first two clear. Therefore, sometimes they say neutral, but that doesn't mean indifferent, doesn't mean not meaningful. So that's why I'd rather call this third lot the mechanical parts of our mind. So like intention, volition, concentration, mindfulness in general. We've got all these bells and whistles on it in the West. But basically, it's a specific part of the mind when you're doing a job, whether it's cooking a cake or watching your breath, that notices that you've wandered off and brings you back to the topic. It's a very practical part of your mind. We have to develop that and perfect that at certain stages of single point of concentration. But it's neither negative nor positive. It's neither neurotic nor not neurotic. We've got to get our head around this approach. So as Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness. Concentration. A sniper needs really good concentration. There's another one called discrimination, which is a massively important mental factor, the term they use in Buddhism, that enables you to distinguish second by second between this and that. And it's the crucial job of that piece of the mind to distinguish between the virtue and non-virtue in our own mind. This is huge. And Buddha gives it great, really powerful status when he presents the five aggregates. These are neither negative nor positive. They're neither having those components that the first two lot have. So that means we need to become familiar with this approach, because it's not the way we think. So the first two lot are what we're concerned about here. So attachment is in the first lot, love is in the second lot. So what are the characteristics of these unhappy ones? Well, first they're disturbing, and second they're delusional. So the delusional one's really hard to see, because that means they're misconceptions. And it's hard to see that, if you're sitting there, you see some kids shouting and yelling, spit coming out of their mouth, eyes wide in horror, irrational words coming out their mouth, and we say, oh, look at that, he's angry. And then you're saying they're having a misconception. It just sounds ridiculous. They're having a total mental breakdown. So the misconception component is all these emotional afflictions, this word they use in Buddhism, these neurotic states of mind. We only notice them, this is the trouble, when they come to the surface, when they come to the level of our body. And because we're so addicted to our bodies, we don't notice them at a much subtler level. We've got to dig down. This is where we can begin to discover how they're misconceptions, whereas love is a valid conception. So this is also an interesting point. The epistemological point of view of the mind, the first description of the mind, the way it functions, this is really, really helpful. In fact, it's mind-blowing if we really get it, What have I got here? So I might say there's a pretty flower, right? So it's fairly obvious. If I looked here and you heard this thought this concept come out of my mouth, there's a pretty flower. We all assume it's my eyes seeing a pretty flower. Well, the fact of the matter is, when you study the mind, the five sensory consciousnesses, that part of our mind that is not physical, but that functions through the medium of the eyeball, the nerves, the skin, whatever, the five sensory consciousnesses, they're actually profoundly limited in their capacity for cognition. So the object of eye consciousness is only two things it can cognize: shape and color. That's it. So you absolutely, that logically, you must ask the question, which part of my mind is cognizing a pretty flower if it's not my eyes? And so then we've got the second part of our mind. We have sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. Now that's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. And that, as far as, so then there's two ways that part mind works. One is conception, and that's the level we live at. At the grossest, the tip of the iceberg of our mental consciousness is conceptuality. And that's when you study in the epistemological model. It's utterly fascinating how conceptuality works. And that's all we know. Then you've got perception, as they call it, and that's got a very specific definition in Buddhist psychology. You've only got that at a subtler level when you've got single point of concentration, when you've necessarily ceased the sensory and the conceptual, which of course it's not posited as a state of mind in the modern world at all. So we live at the level of conceptuality. And so basically the millisecond my eyes go there, my mental consciousness is accessed, and I really mean this now, quicker than Google. I remember Lama Yeshe, when he described the different qualities you get when you get shamatha, he says the mind is more brilliant than the most brilliant computer. And I think we have to take that seriously. So quicker than Google, out of my mouth comes, what a pretty flower. So what's that? It's a series of words. What are words? They're expressions of thoughts, concepts. So what are they? They're called viewpoints, opinions, ideas. So we live at the level of viewpoints and ideas. And this is the mental factors we're describing. They're all simply different opinions. And these are the emotional ones. There's thousands of others. These are the emotional ones that have the emotional component because we're so practiced at them. And it's in that way that the neurotic ones are delusional. So this is where, so basically my eyes see shape and color, and because I've programmed my mind and we've got memory, one fascinating, the mind works in, it's kind of qualitatively, there's the law of karma, the way we sow seeds in the mind, the way they ripen in the future, blah, 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 negative, positive, and so on. But the other way is kind of bare bones. There's nothing we've ever seen or heard or tasted or touched since beginningless time that hasn't stayed stored in our memory. Nothing goes astray, which is how come we can have clairvoyance, which is how come we can remember anything we've done today, which is very little. If you had to write down how much exactly what you thought and said and done today, every one of us would be an absolutely miserable failure. 1% if we're lucky. Because conceptuality is not capable of that. So conceptuality is stories in our head about things. Now, this is what's interesting in the negative and positive states of mind. At this grosser level that we live at, conceptuality, you could say the negative or neurotic ones are exaggerated, distorted opinions. And the positive ones, they're relatively valid insofar as they are linked, they're connected to dependent arising. It's only when you've realized emptiness that they're totally valid. So in other words, forget the flower, let's say the chocolate cake. This is now, we're getting to attachment here. So it's okay, let's look at attachment then. So the three main, as we know, Buddha talks about three poisons, the three toxic emotions. Ignorance is the main one, the ego grasping, the root delusion, the primordially held, beyond instinctive, utter belief in the intrinsic, concrete, independent, separate, inherent me and everything else. And then in terms of oneself, on the basis of that total utter belief, then there's the main voice of that ego, it's known colloquially as ego grasping, and that's attachment, which is multifaceted. And then attachment, so attachments, okay, we'll go into that. And the third one's called aversion or anger. We'll go into these three. We'll go into the two branch ones. So the key function of these neurotic states of mind is they're in their being delusional. They're delusional insofar as they are concepts, but they're misconceptions, that in the sense that they exaggerate. It is a chocolate cake on that plate. It is a chocolate cake, that's valid. It's a triangle, that's valid. It's regular, it's sort of roughly brown, that's a valid cognition. But it's divinely delicious as the cause of my happiness, that's not a valid cognition. And that is the one that attachment sees. So attachment runs the show. Effectively, Lord Buddha is saying in the Four Noble Truths that forget ego grasping, which is the root delusion of everything, but effectively attachment is the main cause of suffering in this universe, which is incredibly shocking to us because we don't even have a definition of it. The best we think of it, using our use of the word, it's sort of being close to somebody, you know. We've got to know Buddha's definition, otherwise we're in trouble. So it's a in its bones is a misconception. And so as Lama Zopa says, what all the delusions do is decorate on top of what is there, in this case, the chocolate cake, and in this case, attachment. What attachment does is decorate on top of that chocolate cake, which is a valid thing, qualities, layers upon layers of qualities that are not there. When we can get this, we are on track with being a Buddhist. This is his unique approach to the mind, you know. So because these are certainly instinctive, since beginning this time, programming our minds in these, and that's why they're so emotional, it's incredibly difficult to see them. And this is why it's vital, if you really want to practice Buddhism, if you want to, it's your decision, not just to say the word, yeah, I'm attached, oh, I'm so attached to chocolate cake, not really know what part of your mind it is, not really know its function. You can't ever identify it. How can you? You know, we're too vague. Delusions decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that are not there. That's the thing. So even the flower, a pretty flower, you know, I don't know what this is called. What's it called? A chrysanthemum or something? Is it? I can recognize a rose. What's it called? It is one. Oh, I was right. How amazing. Okay, so then, you know, if I don't like white flowers and if I don't like those ones, then I'll say, oh, it's a boring flower, isn't it? So it's sort of, this is so evident. I mean, it's embarrassing how simple and evident this is. As our mothers told us, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. This is what Buddha's telling us. It comes from the mind. We don't join the dots though, because we so just hear that, you know, yeah, laugh right here. But this is the point that he's making. Finally, when it comes to realizing emptiness, finally, as Lama Zopa says, when we finally realize, when we finally conquered the root delusion, we finally realize that there's nothing from the side of the chrysanthemum that makes it the chrysanthemum, but there's nevertheless still a chrysanthemum. And this is the two truths, the tricky bit. So the job of being a Buddhist is to keep removing the layers upon layers upon layers of misconceptions until eventually we've achieved, you know, the truth, the reality, the middle way. So these delusions exaggerate, they distort. That's their function, their key function. Their function too is to make us miserable. They're totally painful. So now what's love? Love is defined, so attachment is defined as a conceptual state of mind that exaggerates the deliciousness of the object. Because you see, the mind is like a mirror, as Lama Yeshe says in his Mahamudra book. It's a nice way to put it. Mind is like a mirror. And then whatever it cognizes, or subject, and then whatever it cognizes, whatever it might be, is the object of the mind, you know. So attachment is a conceptual state of mind that exaggerates the deliciousness of the object, cake, boyfriend, chrysanthemum, whatever. Then aversion, which we're getting to, is a concept that exaggerates the ugliness of the object. You know, this is the bare bones function of those concepts. But because it's so deeply habitual is why there's such emotional component to them, you know. Okay, so love is in the second category. It's a virtue, which means it causes you happiness, and therefore it causes you to make others happy. The first lot are delusions, cause you suffering, and then cause you to harm others, because you see things wrongly. Another way to put it, the delusions, as Lama Zopa says, the world appears, This is a broad view in Buddhism about the mind, that the world appears back to us in the aspect of whatever is in our mind. This is why for the Buddha, mind is central to everything. It's central to the universe. It's the creator of all realms, all suffering, all happiness, period. Which is kind of an extreme radical view. And if you just think that's the brain, then it doesn't fit. It's clear, isn't it? So everything appears back to us through the lenses of what's in our mind. So this is why, as Lama puts it, being our own therapist is really the job of being a Buddhist. If we take the view of the stages of the path, which is in tradition, all the traditions in Tibetan Buddhism, gradual first level of practice, and then I like to call junior school, high school, university, which is the compassion wing, and then you've got postgraduate, which is Tantra. Let's say like that, just simply speaking. Then first level, entry level, junior school, grade 1 Buddhism is not even about the mind yet. It's about controlling the servants of your mind. That's about vows, living in precepts, having controlling your body and speech, because they do all the trouble. So this is the very first level of practice. Harness your crazy verbal and physical energy. 99% of your life would be happier if we could just do that. Then you get to the middle scope and you really start to see your mind. That's when we become a Buddhist. The unique approach of the Buddha. And the job is to distinguish between the neurotic, deluded, unhappy, painful states of mind, which causes suffering, and the valid, appropriate, virtuous states of mind, which causes happiness. And of course, this is the wisdom wing. This is about you. Nothing about compassion yet. That comes later. So how to distinguish? Well, incredibly difficult, because they're all so instinctive, A really nice framework to understand how we make mistakes between, confused love and attachment is in the framework of this wonderful technique in the compassion wing called How to Develop Equanimity. This equanimity here is this heartfelt recognition that friends, object of attachment, enemies, object of aversion, we mightn't use the word enemy, but it's a good one, object of anger, and strangers, which is 99.99% of the universe, object of complete couldn't care less indifference, that these three people are actually equal to each other in terms of their wish to be happy and not suffer. So that's just the point. But the thing is here, we can see with a friend, that's the term we use for a person we're attached to. That's the meaning here. That's the one we have love for. And we only have love for them. So what is love? The definition of love, it's a concept as well. It's based on a concept. It becomes emotional once you've practiced it. It's a concept that is the thought, may you be happy. You delight in someone else's happiness. That's the meaning of love. So attachment is utterly, by definition, I-based, self-centered. Self-centered, a very nice phrase. Utterly, don't feel guilty, it's just how it is. Utterly self-centered, and then love is necessarily other-centered. So then if we can see in a relationship, even without even understanding these two very much, that forget that. If in a relationship you mainly only have attachment, well, believe me, it'll be a nightmare. And at some point you'll look in the bed one day and think, who's this ugly person? Because attachment can only go to aversion, or who's this boring guy? Chuck him out and get another one. Because attachment's not sustainable. This is the other thing, because they're delusions, because they're exaggerations, they're embellishments, they decorate. They're not sustainable. They're emotional, neurotic, ridiculous, extreme states of mind, and they're not sustainable. So it's mainly attachment for a person. It'll be very nice sex. It'll be delicious. But there'll be no patience, no kindness, no tolerance, no generosity, no forgiveness. And you'll either kill them or eat them for breakfast, It was mainly attachment. And the fact of the matter is, in the world, if you can see a person who's mainly got delusions, that's what we mean by psychopath. Because they're necessarily I-based, self-centered, literally. And they're deeply emotionally, neurotically painful, In other words, through the lenses of attachment and aversion and ignorance, the three root delusions. This is why these three categories, we see in the entire universe through the lenses of whether or not a person fulfills my needs. If they do, they're called a friend, and then I adore them and have compassion for them. If they don't, if they proactively don't, then they're called enemy, and I hope they suffer. And the third lot, because they neither help nor harm, I can't even see them. Utterly indifferent. I mean, we should be embarrassed at how self-centered this is, but it's the universe. It's called samsara. Monkeys, dogs, ants, everybody, because we all have the three poisons. That's why this view of the mind is so coherent, you know. It's amazing. And all the other, we often hear about how Buddha talks about 84,000 problems, you know. And I remember Ling Rinpoche, the young Ling Rinpoche goes around teaching a bit these days, you know. He often says 21,000 of those 84,000 are rooted in ignorance. 21,000 of those 84 are rooted in attachment. 21,000 are rooted in attachment, anger, and ignorance. And the fourth 21,000 are rooted in all three. So it's a really coherent map. So I often ask the Geshis, please can you show me where I can find the text of the 84,000? No, you won't find it, they say. But Buddha keeps saying it, you know, so it must got to be there somewhere. So love is spacious. Love is based in interdependence. It's connected to others. It sees others to some degree because it's a clear state of mind. I mean, not that clear, but as you progress, it's valid not in a moralistic sense because it's rooted in dependent arising, which is reality. Attachment's not valid, not in a moralistic sense, because it's not rooted in dependent arising, it's rooted in fantasy. It causes pain. It causes you to harm others because the way the world appears to you appears wrongly. And you see, it's fairly easy to see how you can harm others when you're angry, punch and kick and scream, isn't it? You can see that when a person's out of control. But it's much harder to see when it's through attachment, you know. Because it's under the guise of being kind, because we conflate them. We so conflate them. It's as if they're the same state of mind, you know. And the thing is, when you're in the throes of attachment, I'm not criticism, because it brings delicious feelings. This is another whole discussion. But in the third category, I don't want to go too much, not get too technical, but in the third category, you know, there's another one called feeling. And this is a massive one. This is the other one that Buddha points out in the 5 aggregates. This is a huge one to understand, actually. For this discussion, it's really important. Okay, so feeling, you only got 3 kinds as far as this Buddha's view is concerned. You've got happy feelings, unhappy feelings, and neutral feelings. Well, let's forget the neutral, okay? We have the pleasant or unhappy, or pleasant or happy feelings. And we only want those. And then there's the unpleasant, and we only don't want those. So what attachment's job is to find, it's just that from the second we wake up in the morning till the second we go to sleep at night, that's its job, is to find the object, person, thing, sound, smell, taste, touch, that will, when upon contact with it, trigger happy feelings, and then to avoid the rest. That's how we spend our lives. That's what monkeys and dogs do as well. Because the view we have, the samsaric view, is that the cause of those happy feelings is the boyfriend, the cake, the this, the that, or whatever. That's the logic of samsara. And we understand this, we do it all the time. We're expert at it. But this Buddha is saying it's a flawed analysis. So this one of feeling is curious because it's neither, again, it's this odd idea of neither being negative nor positive. It's not a virtuous or non-virtuous state of mind. It's primordial, the nature of being a sentient being, having a body and a mind combined. We have feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So this is an interesting point too, when we think of, another word for that is happiness and suffering. But when we think of suffering, tell me about your suffering, Robina. I will describe the boyfriend cheating on me. And that's just the event, but that's what's in our mind. That's what we hold in our memory. We don't hold the unhappiness in our memory. We hold the vivid story that we have written about the person we are convinced is the direct cause of the unhappiness. So in other words, it's so external for us. Tell me about your happiness, Robina, and I'll describe the cake. This is fascinating. So what's the analysis for the Buddha? We look at the 12 links of dependent arising. You know, this is happening every millisecond of the day. So attachment, let's look more about attachment. Okay, how are we going for time? What's the time? I haven't got a clock. What's the time? What's the schedule today? 90 minutes, 2 hours, 4 hours? What is it? What?
6:30 to 8.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, good. This is why I talk fast, isn't it? I can fit a lot in because there's so much to say. So, okay, so listen. Okay, all right. Oh, look at you. Yes, thank you. I will definitely take it, yeah. I can't believe this kettle. First place I've ever done, and someone's provided me the kettle. I can't believe it. It's wonderful. I love it. Okay, so now listen. Attachment, let's look at it. Lamia, she said, I can tell you about attachment for a whole year. You won't begin to understand until we start working deeply inside. You know? So first of all, because we've been practicing attachment for countless lifetimes, we've got to the point where it's utterly primordially deep and we totally buy into the story. In fact, as Lama Zopa says, bad enough that we see the chocolate cake wrongly, that is to say, through the lenses of attachment, but because it's so primordially deep, we believe the story that it tells us. That's the killer. That's what keeps us paralyzed in samsara, you know. So there is, attachment is multifaceted. It's bare bones concept, but as a result of practicing it and buying into it for so long, the first major result of it, we come into this life program with it, is this primordial feeling of dissatisfaction. And this is really severe, you know, in our culture. We even, you know, it's not only that I don't have enough, but it's that I am not enough. That's what we call self-hate. It's just a habit. You see, if you understand attachment as a simple sense of being an exaggeration, then it's like you got $50, but you're so convinced for so long it's 500 that it appears to be 500. It's for you, it says 500. So you believe it totally every time, and you build up, and there's a point, you build up all this expectation, don't you? One of the functions of attachment is expectation, and then hankering, and then looking forward to it. And you go out to spend, and what is the result? Bitter disappointment. You go crashing down because it wasn't a valid concept. That's why we got dissatisfaction from life after life of practicing attachment. And we can see with some of us, it's very, very severe. You don't learn it from your mother. You don't get it because your mother doesn't love you enough. You come born with it from practicing attachment. So it's always default assumption is I don't have enough. I don't, and even I'm not enough. This is when it's really brutal. So then because you don't have enough or you don't feel you've got enough, then the next feeling of it is the emotional hunger, the hankering. Then you've got to look for something that's missing. And of course you look out there, that's the most obvious level. This is the grossest one. You look for something through the senses, depending on your karma. It could be cake, it could be bodies, it could be handbags, it could be money, whatever the object is. And we're talking the senses here. That's the gross level. And then there's the absolute, and then it appears to you as delicious because it lies to you, the attachment lies to you, and the cake, the more the attachment, the more the emotional hunger, the more divine the chocolate cake looks. It's vibrating deliciousness at you, just begging you to eat it. We know this, and all this is completely instinctive from practice. And then, of course, we believe it will, because there's this feeling of aching, not having enough. So now I've found it, the cake will do it. So what happens is this build up, and you finally you organize the cake, you try and be polite, you don't shove it in the mouth immediately, you know, you might even bless it and offer it to the Buddha. But then you pick it up with your hand and you know exactly where it goes. You don't put it in this hole here. We know which hole it goes in. And then there's this huge expectation, finally all that build up of anticipation, waiting for the pleasure to come. And the point is it does. This is the interesting point. Buddha's not saying you don't get pleasure when you eat cakes. You do. But this is the tragedy. As you're tasting that cake, and pleasure comes, happy feeling comes, at the same time, right alongside is attachment. And as you're experiencing the pleasure, attachment saying, this is not enough. So then you're anticipating the next mouthful, hoping that'll bring it. And then it gets a bit frantic, doesn't it? The second piece comes, and the third piece. And then inexorably, before we realize that what's happening, the pleasure is diminishing. It's turning into unpleasant feelings. And if you kept eating, you'd vomit. This is not being mean. This is a scientific analysis of our experiences. This is why we suffer from attachment, because it never brings what we thought it would. So with a person, it's in the beginning, we all know when you fall in love, it's incredible. The pleasure that is triggered is really incredible. It's like ecstasy. It's divine. I mean, we can know that the pleasure that is triggered from physical contact. We know that. It's delicious, unbelievable. So, of course, it's like in heaven on earth. And, of course, we assume the attachment and the love are the same. They're completely different states of mind. And of course, when the pleasure is triggered so enormously, when you're in love with the person. I mean, talk about the cake. You've never seen anybody so divine in your whole life. It's like they're a goddess, it's like they're God, they're like in heaven, just divine, You faint at the thought of them. We know that. But the tragedy is this is the problem for the Buddha. He's not saying we shouldn't have pleasure. He's saying we've got a wrong analysis of the main cause of it. So the cake or the handsome boyfriend are definitely one of the causes, but they're merely the catalyst. That's all. They catalyze the pleasant feeling. But then, of course, it doesn't last and it turns into unpleasant feeling. And I'm trying to be too gross here, but even the best pleasure on the universe, the best sexual contact in the universe, like with the cake, if you keep having contact, you would die of exhaustion and vomit. I mean, get my point. So this is the logic, Buddha's scientific logic of how the objects are not the main cause of happiness. He's not trying to make us miserable. What he's really saying is, listen, guys, I have found a method of how to get happy feelings that will not change into happy feelings and that are beyond your imagination. So Lama Yeshe, in his Mahamudra book, he always tried to encourage us, because we're so self-piteous. And the Lamas normally don't tell you about bliss and rapture, they just do not. But Lama does. He's incredible. He shows some of the qualities you'd have if you just got single-pointed concentration. He says the rapture, the ecstasy would be beyond belief. But they all say it's peaceful. Because when it's pleasure coming from attachment objects, it's like, as he says, your mind is berserk. Even just water, when you're thirsty, the pleasure's berserk. But when it's from tasting the potential of your own mind and going beyond the sensory and the conceptual, it's incredible joy and utterly peaceful. I mean, that's exciting to hear. So really, Buddha's not saying don't have pleasure. He's not saying we're naughty and we're sinners. He's trying to explain to us his scientific analysis of why what we get now isn't valid, because it won't last. It turns into more suffering. And he says, I found a method to get happiness that doesn't turn into suffering. That is, so basically what he's saying is, honey child, you think happy feelings come from contact with attachment objects. No, sweetie pie. Happy feelings come when you give up attachment. So it's actually his methodology is to get such happiness you won't believe it. But they don't say it like that in the text. You've got to find it out slowly before you get too exhausted. Are we communicating? So, no? Was that a no or is that a yes? Okay. So love then, so the difference between love and attachment, when you see that divine person you are attached to in the beginning, and of course this is the point, whether it's your brand new baby, I mean, yourself, your baby is so divine, you can't believe it. I'll show you a picture of 1,000 babies and yours is there. You'll identify immediately, because it's a karmic connection, of course. They look utterly divine, and that's attachment working. And I would say I'm glad my mother had attachment for me. She would have killed me otherwise. Because you see, when you're attached to somebody, meaning they look divine to you, you've got a close karmic connection, then it is easy to love them. It is easy to want them to be happy. It is easy to sacrifice your life for them. But of course, if they start not fulfilling your attachment, they start like your kid being mean at you and being horrible, or the hubby starts cheating on you or getting bored by you, then it's hard to love them. So it's easy to love a person, to want a person to be happy when they're divine to us. That's why when you're to the level of bodhisattva, they have that love for everybody. This is like mind-boggling. So our love at the moment is contingent upon attachment. Attachment getting what it wants, basically. Because attachment is a junkie, basically. Another way of talking. Attachment is this junkie in us every millisecond. This is meant to make us have compassion for ourselves, by the way, not put ourselves down. It's like a junkie in us every millisecond, and it's like, or not, if you like, it's like a fragile child that can only cope with nice things. Attachment can only bear nice things. It's completely frantic. And so what's the response when it doesn't get what it wants? And that's 1,000 times a day. That's aversion. Volatile is anger, milder levels of aversion, which we never pay attention to, but they're literally mild anger, the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. They're called irritation, frustration, annoyance, anxiety. These are all expressions of thwarted attachment. When attachment gets what it wants, that second, the food is exactly like you like, the coffee is exactly what you want, the temperature is exactly like you like it, and we keep doing this all day to make sure we get everything we want. It's very nerve-wracking. But a second it isn't. We know that. It's panic attack. We know that. This is how fragile we are. This is because of attachment. This is junky, I mean, another way, it's the narcissist in us, it's the psychopath in us. I mean, it's desperate to only get the nice things, which means to only get what I want, by definition. So if there is love there, if there is patience and kindness and forgiveness, then you'll have a good relationship. It'll be hard work, but it will work. If it doesn't, then that's when you kill each other or yourself. It's because of attachment. Therefore, because of anger, aversion, and then internalized aversion is depression. We're talking 1,000 times a day here when attachment is thwarted. It's not just occasionally. It's so fragile. And every second we're wanting happy feelings. And the second we don't get what attachment wants, unhappy feelings arise and we have a panic attack. We're like fragile, we're really hard. We can't handle things going wrong. It's because of attachment and aversion. So if you do have, I'm talking relationship, if you do have love and kindness and patience and forgiveness, then you've got to work on it, because at some point when you start living together and he farts in the sheets instead of the toilet and he snores, ordinary things, he slurps his coffee, from a distance he was divine, now get a bit close up, I'm being reasonable. It's really hard. It's the smallest things that make you want to kill somebody, because attachment's not getting what it wants. This is the source of our pain, people. Are we communicating? I think you should ask me some questions now. Come on, you people. You Zoomers, I'm looking at you, but you don't think I am, but I am seeing your faces. Who's there? Karen, Eileen, Rocky, Stephanie, Christopher, good. Yes, sweetheart. Do you have a microphone for the speakers? For the questions? No. I'll repeat. I know, but I'll repeat your question. Go on.
Okay. What do you do if my someone sucks?
If what, darling?
My someone practice sucks.
I beg your pardon?
Like my one pointed concentration practice sucks. Like I can't.
I mean, you're a normal human being unless you're an advanced practitioner. What do you mean do? It's just you're like everybody else. What's special? Do you really? I mean, you think, sweetie pie. To get single point of concentration properly, you need to give it sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and pussycats and dogs and everything else, and become a nun and get lots of practice and go to the mountains, and then after 2 or 3 years you will get it. It's absurd to even pretend you can get some semblance of single point of concentration living in a regular life. You need lots of merit, lots of practice, lots of perseverance, and lots of good qualities. So be happy with what you're doing. What do you mean when it sucks? What makes it think? What is the result that you think is making it suck? Okay, well that's normal. You're normal. You're surprised? I mean, are you surprised? You're surprised. You think you're supposed to focus, do you?
What?
Do you think you're supposed to focus, do you?
I know it's not supposed to, but it's not.
It is supposed to, but that takes time. But then why do you expect that you should have it? I mean, you're obviously not read enough about it. You have false expectations, basically. That's your problem. Your problem isn't that you can't concentrate, it's that you've got a false expectation that you should be. But may I say something else? The main benefit for most of us in the ordinary world who do some single point of concentration, unless we're special, is that you learn to see your shitty mind, and you should be very happy about that. Because when you open your eyes and get off your cushion and you go into the kitchen and in the world, then you're not just noticing the traffic, but you're also noticing what's going on in your mind, and that is necessary. So be happy you're seeing your crazy mind, and I'm not joking, because they're the problem, and now you can see them. And now you can start being your own therapist and working on them in your daily life. Are we communicating?
Yes.
Thank you. Good. Yes, somebody else, please. Oh, we have a mic. Good.
Thank you. Do you think that
I don't think you're hearing. Speak a bit louder, sweetheart.
Do you think that for lay practitioners, having a partner and having friends is actually a very powerful way to practice, because then we can see where we are with attachment and what's coming up? Of course, living like regular life and going into monastics is also very powerful. But do you think that being like a lay practitioner?
I mean, that's not the issue. I mean, you can say that there's a choice between being a monastic and not being a monastic, but in the end, we all got the same delusions. We've all got the same neuroses, and some monk or nun can be far more neurotic than you, depending on where each of you are on your path. Do you understand? So it's due to our past karma very strongly. So you make the choices that are reasonable for you based on what you need to do. And that's it's not a question of, is it therefore that something? I mean, it depends. I know very clearly for me it's a no-brainer that I should be a nun. If I had a husband or children, they'd be dead. So it's just as well I didn't have. It was a no-brainer for my mind and my style that I'd be a monastic. You've got to know what's right for you. And then within that, especially if you're on the Mahayana path, that's your practice.
Thank you.
Do you understand? But it's super difficult having an attachment object in your face every day, living in the same bed every day is a pretty intense practice, Petal. So if you can really do that one and grow as a practitioner, I really, really admire. Do you understand? Good. Okay. What else, people?
There's a few questions from
good.
online.
Let's ask them. Great.
From online. There's a few questions.
What? Ask them, please. Yeah, read them out to me. In the chat, you mean in the chat? Can you read them out for everybody's sake, please? Or do you want me to read them out? Is that the plan? Would you prefer I read them? Is that the idea?
Yes.
Okay, you want me to read them? All right, I'll do that. So we apologize about the buzzing. Oh, that's not a question. Om Mani Padme Hum. Namaste, that's not a question. There's no questions here.
Is it?
Look, where are they?
Yeah, right there.
Where? Oh, down. Oh, I see. Up the top. Oh, okay, I get it. Okay. Go slowly. I'll try that one. Hello, we will be starting in 5 minutes. Eileen says, can't hear anything. Tibet House, we are aware. Cindy, me either. This is not questions. It has not started yet. Yeah, the buzzing. We apologize. Oh, Mani Padme Hum Ben Courtin. Most of us need to be, here we go.
I think we're seeing a different.
I know. Oh, well,
1 second.
So Cassia says to everyone at 7:30, most of us need to be nourished by others. How not to turn it into attachment. Thank you, Petal. That's the point of this whole discussion. Let's answer that. We are answering it. It's like you're saying to me, we need to be nourished, so I need to eat good food. Well, I mean, I'm giving the first part of the talk, which is to know how to distinguish between good food and bad food. So you've got to distinguish between what attachment is and what love is and what kindness is. And when you know that and you do a practice every day, you notice the attachment in your mind, you notice the anger, you notice the jealousy before it vomits out your mouth. And then you can change the concepts and turn them into kindness and love and patience. That's how you do the practice, Cassia. That's the practice. It's very conscious. It's very intentional. It's not hippy-trippy. It's really hard work. If the brain and heart are dead, what is alive in Tukdam during meditation? Thank you very much. Okay, good. So this person is referring to what happens when a person's meditating. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche recently passed away, and he was in meditation for a couple of days. So basically, this is the Vajrayana model. We've got gross consciousness, which is the sensory, and that's inextricably linked to the gross physical, which is this bag of bones here. So at the time of death, it's described in terms of 8 stages, like 8 stages of gradual deconstruction of the various components that make us up. So the first 4 stages is the ceasing of the sensory consciousnesses and the various physical elements. So by the time you stop breathing, the world, the materialist world says you're dead, but your gross consciousness only has ceased. Now your subtle consciousness is there, and that's your mental consciousness. So that includes the states we have now, love and compassion. They are mental states, and they go to much subtler levels. That's still existing in the body. And so it can be up to 3 days before the subtle consciousness leaves the body. So then the subtlest level, the final stages of this deconstruction of these components, they refer to it as extremely subtle mind. And then both the subtle and the very subtle are also inextricably linked to subtle physical energies. As His Holiness Dalai Lama says, the way the universe is as far as the Vajrayana is concerned, you've got minds, billions and billions of mind streams, and then you have matter, which is the 4 elements. And all minds are inextricably linked to their own set of the 4 elements. So the gross level, and then as you get to the subtle physical energy is these 72,000 subtle channels from the top to bottom. The wind energy, the prana or wind energy that courses through those channels, that is inextricably linked to all the different mental states. And then there's this set kind of subtle drops, red and white kundalini. So then, and this is something, you go to your Tibetan doctor, she's going to feel your pulses, similar to the Chinese. And because she's, this Vajrayana model is the basis of Tibetan medicine, she's aware of exactly the winds that are imbalanced, and she will know because unbalanced, and she will know that's related to your attachment. That's why you've got anxiety. So the mind and the physical winds are intimately linked. And that's why everything we do with our mind impacts upon the winds, and that in turn causes sickness or health. So it's in that sense that we create karma. So when you're in meditation, your mind will have gone to the subtlest level, the clear light one, the extremely subtle, these great yogis, and they are conscious. They've been practicing all their lives, and they're conscious all the way through these stages. They don't lose awareness. They go to ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle, meditating on emptiness. And then they get to the very subtle level, and they stay conscious sometimes at that subtle level. And that because that's the subtlest level of mind, the subtlest, the most subtle, it's the most powerful, and you can actually get enlightened then. So that's what the great yogis are doing. Okay. So with concentration of the mind, they can slip into the chakras. I beg your pardon. Which remains after death. Not so much like that, no. The chakras are just the different meeting points of these thousands of channels where they're blocking the wind energy. So as you're getting more subtle, and the great yogis, you're unblocking these different chakras, and the winds and the mind can go to the very subtle one. That's what's happening. That's right. Next, that's it. That's all I've got. Any more? Yes, please. Microphone for this person, please. Yes.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Sometimes I will consider doing an action that could either be done from attachment or compassion.
That's right, exactly.
Something like maybe at work. I know in theory that this action can be done with compassion.
Yes.
For my coworkers or
That's
for
right.
customers or whatever.
That's right.
But I know that I feel attachment in this moment, and so sometimes I'll wait and I'll be like, oh, I'm just going to do metta and wait until it feels like compassion, and then I'm going to do it anyway. Is that? But then even when I do it, sometimes
I understand.
Attachment comes right back up.
No, it's a really good point, and that kind of awareness and mindfulness is so important. But you've got to realize that it's impossible to not have attachment until finally you realize emptiness. You can have less attachment, you can be more conscious and more intentional, and you can not follow the attachment and give the cake to someone else, for example. Then you still might have attachment, but you follow the compassion part. That's as we get more and more conscious in our daily life, and more conscious distinguishing between the different states of mind, you begin to get more control. But you can't not have attachment, it's impossible. Until you're highly advanced. But you try to grow the other components and subdue the attachment, But it's wonderful what you're doing. You're practicing. It's perfect, sweetheart. It's exactly how it should be. But don't wait too long because you might miss out. In other words, if you're attached to me and you see me running under a bus, don't wait till you're not attached before you save me, please. So risk it, okay? I want you to save me. Then you can calm it down later and realize you could save the ugly one as well. Do you understand? Okay. Who else? Please, people, any old question? Yes, sweetheart.
Good evening, Robina. Thank you for teaching tonight. So Up until a few minutes ago, I felt like I was a complete saint in my last relationship and breakup, but then you said something that caused me to reconsider. Being, you mentioned how one can harm others through attachment, calling it love.
Yes.
So please explain in precise detail how one would harm others under
Okay,
the
how we
guise of
harm
love.
others based on attachment, but it's a honey-covered razor blade. It can look like kindness. Okay. Well, I mean, okay. Well, first of all, extreme examples, this is not what you're talking, but extreme examples of how attachment's so tricky that it blinds us from seeing the harm we do. So I'll use an extreme example, and this is clearly not in your case, it's obvious. But, I use the example of somebody who's attached to fishing. Fishing is a good example because in our culture, it's considered fine. If it was poodles, then you'd be in trouble because we're attached to our poodles, and you've got to go kill your poodles at night, isn't it? But because we accept fishing, our culture we accept fishing, then always this example. I always use the example, I remember years ago, this woman came to Courtin and she talked about, her son had died 5 years before, and she was devastated when she heard about karma because he'd been a professional fisherman all his life. So it's a really good, nice analysis to do. This is an extreme example of how attachment can be tricky, can blind us. How attachment blinds us. This is the point, blinds us from seeing clearly. This is the point. So basically there he is, he's in a past life and he's been in the lower realms, according to the Buddhism, due to killing. The main result is a result, and that's finally finished. The karma is over. And then he, like a miracle, one of his virtuous karmic seeds of non-killing is triggered and he gets a nice mummy in California. And so there's 4 ways that karma ripens. There's killing, there's the type of rebirth, he got a human body. And as a result of non-killing karma, he's got millions of karmic seeds. So he gets finally a human life. He's finished the non-killing, the main result of killing. He's finished the main result of killing. He's now got a human body. But there's 3 other ways karma ripens. The next one, this is the main one, is the tendency to keep killing. Now, have a look at this human planet. Most of us kill something because it's considered normal. That's the result. That's one of the residual results of having killed. So he had a tendency to kill. So there is a little boy, he's taken fishing for the first time, and then the karma was triggered. The second he saw fishing, instantaneously, as a result of the strength of his past habit of killing, very strong pleasant feelings would have been triggered. The next millisecond, attachment kicks in that paints a really delicious picture of fishing. It appears beautiful to him. So it's dazzling. And so then because he got pleasant feelings, and we all want pleasant feelings, and then because the attachment paints it as a beautiful picture, then he thinks it's good. So naturally he becomes a fisherman. So all his life, a kind man, a generous man, the mother said, kind, generous, loving, but he had this particular karma of attachment to killing fish that triggered very pleasant feelings. So of course, everybody would do it. The best we can do is eat cake. That's why we keep eating it, because we can't say no, because it appears delicious to us and it triggers pleasant feelings. So the thing is with human beings and fish, his mother never liked going fishing with him, but she went one time. And this is the point. All those years he went fishing, he's a kind man. Because he's got attachment to fishing, he's literally as blind as a bat. He never for 1 second sees the suffering of the fish. And it's evident to his mum. These fish, they don't have legs, they don't have a voice, they're wriggling their little bodies, showing they want to be back in the water, please. He literally doesn't see it. This is the suffering of attachment. So when you're let's say you're really attached to a person because you think their body is the most divine thing since sliced bread, and you want sex with them. And of course, when we seduce each other, if you don't seduce each other, you rape each other. So but normal, nice ways, you seduce them, they make them feel you like them, isn't it? And you do like them because they appear so divine to you and you want to be kind to them. So of course, because we're all dying to be loved, and then you're looking at me with divine look, of course I think you love me. And then you sleep with me and say, bye, I'm shattered, I'm devastated because I thought you liked me. That's how attachment cheats. Because let's say you're attached to me, my pretty body, you see a pretty body and you can't wait to have contact with my pretty body. So you don't rape me, but you seduce me instead, which I think is being kind. And then like I remember this girl who was doing Tinder. I always say, I wish I had Tinder. I had to work really hard when I was a hippie. I had to go find people and seduce them. With Tinder, you go press, you know. I couldn't believe it. So this girl was saying it was really a bit depressing. She'd just have sex with this nice boy, and they presumably looked at each other nicely and said sweet words, you know, very nice, which feels like being liked. And then she's getting dressed and she looks at the bed and he's on Tinder getting the next one. This is how attachment harms each other. Simply. Are you hearing what I'm saying? The fishing one is fairly evident, but this one is more tricky because it looks like kindness. This is the point, when you know, my body is so divine and you're so attached and so excited and we enjoy each other's contact and we are smiling at each other, we are saying sweet words because we're having very nice feelings, but if it's mainly just attachment and you have no interest in seeing me again or even like wanting me to be happy, then of course I think you do, and that's when we mislead each other. That's a simple example. Do you understand? Or that's not answering your question. Sweetheart.
Could you just re-clarify the Tinder example?
Sweetheart. I mean, listen, attachment is emotional hunger. Attachment is emotional hunger, especially with sense objects, you know, it's emotional hunger. So when you have contact with the object, it triggers very pleasant feelings. So pleasant feelings are very happy. So when you've got pleasant feelings, you're smiling and laughing, even just the cake. So then if you have very happy feelings and you're laughing and smiling and showing joy when you have contact with me physically, I make the mistake, because I'm attached to you loving me, I make the mistake of thinking that you love me and want to take care of me and meet me again. You see, that's my attachment, because I'm hungry. This is a deeper attachment. I'm hungry for your approval, and you seem to be really approving of me, so I'm over the moon. And then you bugger off and don't come back. Excuse me, that's Australian, we say that. We are tricked by it, because it triggers pleasant feelings, and pleasant feelings make you happy. And if you're happy, I think I'm making you happy, and I want to be loved too. So that's how we all help hurt each other, you know. Are we not communicating? Sweetheart?
Yes, I understand.
What's the piece that's missing for you?
The piece that's missing is how one would hurt another blinded by
Sorry, how one would what?
How one would hurt another blinded by attachment.
But I'm just told you. That's one example. That's one example. Is it not? If you say I'm rich and you really like money, it's obvious attachment. You're so wanting my money, even though I'm fat and wrinkled and old, you know. You don't care because you're so excited by my money. You're able to look happy, and I would think that you like me, and it's a lie. We do this all the time to each other. Can't you see? Well, instead of questioning me, how about you give me an example and I'll then tell you the answer?
I'm just going to have to digest what you said.
I think so.
We'll take it up at the next one.
I think it's good, yeah. Okay. In Brooklyn, when I see you next.
Exactly,
all right,
yes.
Okay, go. Yes, Mike.
Hi.
Somewhere else. Okay,
sorry.
coming. Yes, sweetheart.
If you experience deep loss or grief
A little bit closer to Mike, sweetheart.
if you experience a lot of loss or grief, which
Good.
feels like an afflictive emotion,
Yes.
it feels also though that sometimes it can come from attachment, but there's also love there.
Yes, of
too.
course. Oh, but darling, this is a really good point. Is that it?
Yeah,
Sorry,
it's
okay.
yeah.
So I think the
that's it.
word grief, if you look at the list of mental factors in the Buddhist psychology, you won't find it. So I think grief is made up of several components, as you just said. There is no question there's attachment there. When anything you've been close to, especially when it's a human, and you've also had love for them, it's unbelievably painful to see the absence of them. It's like literally painful. But you can even see that with objects that you're really attached to, and it breaks. It's kind of the feeling of loss. That's literally from attachment. Of course it is. Now, if it's mainly attachment, you'll be like, I remember this guy I met in Queensland. His partner had died 5 years before. He was a completely broken person because it was 99% attachment. He's lost. All he thought of day and night was this person who wasn't there any longer. So that's when it's mainly attachment, I'd say. But then, of course, I know like His Holiness, when he used to talk about his mum who died soon after she died, he'd be in tears. Then the next 5 minutes later, he's cracking jokes again, because he has got the sadness of losing her, but also talking about her qualities and this beautiful human being that wasn't there anymore. That can be love and affection and compassion. Of course it is. Yes, darling. But if it stays and stays, because often what happens, especially if you've been really in love with somebody and they die fresh in the newness of the relationship, or even later, people are scared to give up the grief because they think they're cheating the person. They think they've got to stay miserable, you know, because after a while it does fade, and that's very scary. People think they've given up loving them. So we're going to be very aware of our mind. Do you understand? Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you so
sweetheart.
much.
Good. What else? Yes, up the front here, please. Up the front here, yeah. Keep on time. What's the time? Gina, time. Quarter, okay. Yes, sweetheart.
Thank you for teaching.
Good.
Can you speak about the gap between realizing shamatha and realizing emptiness?
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. There's more than a gap. There's a massive chasm between them. We've probably had single point of concentration in countless lifetimes. We've been will-turning kings. We could even have had bodhicitta, but we've lost it because we haven't realized emptiness. So it's massive. I mean, if you're on the Hindu path, you stay in this formless realm for eons. If you're on the other path, you go to the God realms for eons, but you don't realize emptiness. So it's massive. This is the point at which Lord Buddha diverged.
Is the realization of emptiness at the super, you were saying gross, subtle, super
No,
subtle?
it's got to be, you can't possibly realize emptiness until you've got shamatha. But it doesn't, you see, this is the biggest misunderstanding. Because the experience of shamatha is so astonishing. You'd think you're enlightened. It's so amazing. It's so incredible, the way Lama talks. So like you can see the universe. You can easily think, if you didn't have education, that that's enlightenment. But you've got to consciously then use that subtle mind and to realize emptiness. It's an intentional thing to do. If you don't even know about that, you won't ever do it. It's massively different, hugely different. It doesn't come naturally. Emptiness doesn't come naturally. Amazing feeling of connectedness and all those things, and bliss and joy and blah, they come. But the realization has to be absolutely intentional, based on years and years of practice and study and purification, and then meditating for a long time, especially on dependent arising, in order to get the realization of emptiness with the concentrated mind.
But why doesn't it come naturally if it's the natural? Why doesn't it come naturally if it's our natural state? If we all have Buddha nature, why doesn't it come naturally?
Well, that's an interesting question. Why? I mean, okay, an acorn. What Buddha nature means is like an acorn. Would you agree, the way they're talking, we don't talk like this. Would you agree that what's defined as an acorn is a potential oak tree? Do you agree with that?
Yes.
That's how they're talking. So every acorn possesses oak tree nature, but it doesn't, but you got to hold it in the sky for 47 years. Nothing will happen. It needs the right conditions. So your very subtle mind is just the beginning. Your shamatha is just the beginning. Now you got to do the work of removing the delusions from the mind, which are all, you can be in the formless realm for eons, blissful. But the delusions are still in the mind. You haven't done the work to get rid of them. So you've got to do very intentional, precise work to deconstruct and unpack and unravel all the delusions with that blissful mind. Not just be happy with the bliss.
Thank you.
You with me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
My question, two parts. The first is, I imagine the parts of myself as it relates to attachment and love that are the most harmful are the ones that I flinch away from the most, or the most habitual or automatic. So I'm curious, like, what are the ways or a way to go about examining that? And then the second part is...
I think I missed exactly the point. Would you mind a bit closer?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Better?
Yeah, so I imagine the parts of myself that are most harmful to others and myself.
So attachment, anger, jealousy.
As it relates to, so if there's attachment and love, like I'm trying to distinguish, am I acting from a point of attachment or am I acting from love?
Okay.
And I imagine that the parts that are acting out of attachment are really hard to discern or to
Very
discriminate.
tricky, exactly.
So I'm wondering, like, I feel like I'd have an aversion to seeing them. Like
Yeah,
I
of
would
course we do,
flinch
we all
away.
do, we all do. And because
Yeah.
attachment and love are so connected. So, I mean, I think we've got to start with the simplest examples. Because, okay, one of the key signs of all the neuroses is that they feel unhappy. There's a distress there. And if we're really careful, you'll feel that kind of like an anxiety or a tightness. Like even just having a conversation and we start to slightly disagree about something. Slightly disagree. First of all, we're having a lovely time and we're all laughing and suddenly we say different things. Then already, it's got a bit tight. And suddenly you're kind of clinging a little bit to your view and I'm clinging a bit to my view. So that second, you notice that. Straight away, you'd have the patience to say, well, what do you mean by that? Instead of sitting into your own position. Tiny point, tiny one. I mean, not to mention when there's a noise, like you come down to the kitchen and you're just in meditation and I slurp my tea. You adore me, you love me, but that really annoys you. So that second, you see, it's really hard to see attachment until it doesn't get what it wants. So the time to notice is the annoyance, and annoyance is mild anger. It's the response when attachment is thwarted. So be on the lookout for that tightness, that annoyance. Because attachment's too subtle to notice. You with me? So when you notice attachment's not getting what it wants, that's the sign. Grab it.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So
That's
there's
the
like
one.
investigating annoyance, frustration, agitation.
Because they're mild aversion, and anger or aversion is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants, and it's 1,000 times a day. The tiniest events can trigger it. It's too hard to see attachment because everything's flowing nicely, getting what you want, and everything just feels lovely. And then this thing stops in its tracks. That's the moment to catch. And that's why the first level of practice is zip the lip. If we could all control our mouths, 90% of our problems wouldn't happen, I swear. Do you understand?
Yeah. And on the back half of that question, say you're in relationship and it's already hard to know our own relationship to attachment and love. How do we discern that from the other? Is it the same
How do you
way?
discern what?
Discern, like, are they connected to us through attachment or to
Oh, I
love?
see. Oh my God, this is a really tricky one. Yeah, I know. I mean, if we start getting paranoid, you're just paralyzed. This is where this is where, yeah, gosh, oh my goodness. Because you see, okay, we need to talk about this attachment, okay? This might just help answer some questions. The most primordial attachment, more than sex and drugs and rock and roll, is attachment to be seen and heard and approved of. So that's the one that drives us to relationships. In other words, the assumption of this attachment is that just by definition, the assumption of this attachment is that on my own, I'm just not enough. I need smiles. I need contact. Even in our culture, that's how we become real people. We think we have to be socialized in order to become our own person. But this is schizophrenic for the Buddha. Because the attachment is already an assumption since a baby that somehow you're not enough. And you're yearning for mummy's smile and you get it. So even then you think, oh, I must be okay, she smiled at me. And then tomorrow she hits you for doing the same thing. No wonder we get confused. Attachment to be neat and seen and heard is so primordial. And when it's really strong, it's like we go crazy. We can't trust anything we're seeing because we all don't believe somebody else likes us. And when we discover they do, we're in heaven. And it's really tricky because we can't read all the signs. And that's what we have to learn to. I love the saying in our culture, become our own person, become content in ourself. We have to learn to do that. Then we're going to have valid relationships and reasonable, not needy, panic-stricken relationships. They say the yogis in the mountains who've given up everything are still thinking about what the people in the village are thinking about them. It's the last one to go, and it's the main voice in our head. We're all the time having conversations with somebody, hoping that someone's there, want to tell people what we feel. And this is the point that shows how terrible we are, suffering, that it seems like unless I can tell you what I'm thinking, then what I'm thinking is not valid. That's really a serious mental illness, and we've all got it. So when that's really strong, there's confusion. But some sense of your own person, some sense of being grounded in who you are and knowing what you want and then you can relate to another person more reasonably. when it's coming from this terrible craving to be seen and heard and loved. That's why when you get with the power dynamics in a relationship, you get the victim one who allows themselves to be abused and bullied. This is so common because we're craving to be seen. Oh, he really does love me, punch again, It's right. It's huge, this one. Attachment to being seen and heard. But we just think it's normal in our world. Are we communicating?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Yes, sweetheart. Can microphone, please? Yes.
Thank you. How do one replace attachment with love? And then it makes sense.
Sweetheart, listen. It sounds like a nice question, but you just have to keep listening and keep practicing. Are you a practitioner?
Mhm.
Well, just keep practicing, darling, and studying what the mind is, and you'll get the answer.
Okay.
All right? Good. Thank you, sweetheart. Any other questions? Yeah? Lovely. Maybe it's time to go home, is it? It's almost 8. Well, I mean, what do you think? Time to go home? And I'll see. And we just began the conversation, that's all. We can meet next month and talk about karma, but I'm sure this will come up again. What do you think? No more questions? I'm happy to keep talking if you'd like. Still light, look. Yes, sweetheart, go. A couple more questions, come on, then we can finish. Yes, darling.
Well, since we're all out of questions, I had
Good,
one
yes,
about
please.
the nature of pleasure. So pleasure is kind of in the middle of the dependent origination.
No.
No?
Pleasure is simply happy feelings.
Happy feeling.
Or you have unhappy feelings.
Oh.
And attachment only wants to get the object to get the happy feelings because we don't know how to get them without an object. And then unhappy feelings are, when things, so it's not in between anything.
Oh, okay. So, but we're talking about hedonic, like pleasure and pain.
No,
right?
I'm just talking about happy feelings. Don't give all those labels.
Oh, okay.
Sort of, yeah, because when you have happy feelings, the fisherman got happy feelings from fishing because of his connection with killing, which is, it sounds shocking to think he got happy feelings from killing, but he did because the habit was strong, karmically. And then somebody has happy feelings when you're kind to a person. That's the better one, because the one we have now, mostly the hedonic one, as you said, mostly is really the happiness of a junkie. It's just the automatic response to getting the sense object. Then it's happy feelings, but the Buddha would say they're really kind of contaminated happy feelings. They're really berserk and they don't lead to long-term happiness because you're creating negativity to get them.
So I guess the question is, when you eat the chocolate cake and it touches the tongue,
Yeah.
as you practice, does it still feel like happy feeling or?
No, it still feels like happy feeling, but as you lessen attachment, the happy feeling will be much better. You get far more joy and happiness when you've given up attachment. That's why the joy and the bliss of shamatha. And then, but eventually so this is why if you're on the Mahayana path, by offering your food and thinking you're offering it to others, then slowly that itself, those virtuous thoughts bring you joy. And then offering it to others, you'll still have the joy based on the sensory contact, but it won't be so berserk. It'll be more pure happiness, more pure happy feelings, especially if it's based on a pure motivation. You understand?
Thank you.
And then you see, the thing is, when you're a great yoke, when you've finally given up attachment, this is why you can transform attachment on the Vajrayana path. This is why you can transform it on the Vajrayana path. Because when you're a yogi and you've realized emptiness, you've still got a body, your tongue doesn't fall out when you've given up attachment. And actually the pleasure that's triggered when you eat that cake, if you're a yogi, is 1,000,000 times more delicious, but there's no attachment to it. There's no attachment to it. There's no junkie there. So it's just delicious joy. Do you understand? Looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to that. Who else, people? One more question.
Thank you very much.
Yeah?
How does karma, right here,
Yes.
sorry, how does karma affect attachment? Because I feel these, when I was younger, I was just acting out of habitual type things until I kind of came to sit and realized that a lot of it was out of these primordial feelings, you call them.
Yeah.
Which, is that your way of just saying like kind of karmic, something that?
Well, karmic just means what you come into this life programmed with. So that fisherman, he was programmed with intensely ingrained habit to kill. And that equaled the amount of joy he experienced when he met fishing. It's like he found his life again, you know? So karma is almost, you can't begin to understand ourselves if we don't understand what we came into this life with. So it affects everything. But at the same time, you can still talk about karma on the one side and talk about the mind on the other. You can still talk about them distinctly. But of course, they're utterly connected. In other words, even just the intensity of your attachment is a habit, is from karma, you know? Some people who've got realizations come into this life with not much attachment, just lots of love and compassion. And they don't have a problem with attachment. They don't fight with people. They're pretty joyful. That's because they've got less attachment from past karma, from practicing it. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Good.
absolutely.
All right,
Thank you very
darling.
much.
So we'll go into karma next month. Yeah, in June. Okay, people, that's it. So there's even 1% of anything that's been useful. I'm really happy. I've got something from this. Thank you for asking me to talk, because it was very helpful for me. So if any of it's been useful to you too, then that's great. So we just dedicate, we think, but you see, there's not a single second of anything we've heard that's gone astray. That's what's delicious. It's all gone into our memory. So we can access it, you know. And I think everything that's useful, we use it to develop our own amazing potential and to be a benefit to others. And may compassion, may bodhicitta grow and grow in the hearts of all. Jangchog, Semchog Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam, Ke Guchi, Ke Panyampa, Me Pa Yang, Gongne, Gondu Papa Shog. And then we dedicate Gewa Di, Nyudu Dag, Nama Sangye, Drubyune, Drowa Chikyang Malupa, Dei Sala Gopa Shog. And any of you know Lama Zopa Rinpoche, my teacher. He passed away soon, recently, and His Holiness wrote a very lovely prayer, a swift return prayer. So we requested he come back soon in a body that we can see and hear, so we can keep practicing. If that thought's a nice thought for you, then you have that too. And tonight, actually, 10:30 our time, but morning in India, we're offering a long life puja to His Holiness, which is very nice. So some of us are going to be listening, joining the puja on Zoom this evening. Anybody like to join? Go into the Shantideva website, you'll find it. That's all, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's been very nice. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, sweethearts, all of you on Zoom. Goodbye.
Thank you.